Hi folks, welcome to another episode of Painting in the Basement with Happy Landscapes. I'm your host, Chris. If this is your first time joining us, I'd like to welcome you and ask that you please click that like and subscribe button. In this episode, I paint Bob Ross's Tranquil Wooded stream, at least my version of it. I saw this painting the week before Christmas when I went to North Carolina for the Bob Ross exhibit. I absolutely fell in love with that painting and decided I had to paint it. Now, I don't paint it exactly like he did, which you will see eventually, but for the most part, I follow his directions to the T. So rather than spend this video narrating my whole process and giving step-by-step directions, because Bob did it much better, I thought I'd take this opportunity to share a story with you. Sometimes people ask me why I paint landscapes, why I enjoy it so much. And the answer is really quite simple. When I'm outside, in nature, that's where I feel closest to God. I've always been a rather spiritual person. Now I know some of you might not be very religious, and that's okay. I hope you'll still listen to my story. I own a piece of property that I inherited from my grandparents a number of years ago. It was their homestead, where they settled after the war. That would be World War II. They raised cattle, pigs, ran a small sawmill, pretty much whatever they could do to get by. I spent many a weekend during my childhood wandering those hills, chopping wood, swinging from grapevines, and hunting squirrels. When you spend so much time in a place, every sight, sound, and smell becomes familiar. The old cedar tree that looks like a deer becomes a landmark permanently etched in your brain. My grandparents would refer to different locations by names like the Old Barn or Joe's Tater Patch. And after so many years, you don't question why or how they got those names. Those woods became a retreat for me, a place where I could get away and reflect on life, where I could commune with God and find inspiration in the complex simplicity of the natural world. For several years after it became mine, I tried to maintain the property much as they had, bush hogging, keeping the roads clear, planting food plots, trying to keep the squirrels and rats out of the house. But eventually, it became too much to keep up with. The house fell into disrepair, the thieves broke in and stole anything they thought had value. The tractor broke down, and I just didn't have the time to make the trip every weekend. I resigned myself to letting nature take over, to do what I could, when I could, so that I could, at the very least, still go hunting every once in a while. Several years passed like this, when I realized something else. Taxes were expensive, and I was running out of money. After brainstorming the possibilities of what I could realistically do with the resources I had, I came to a decision. I would harvest some timber. Now, I was pretty hesitant about doing this. I've often seen wooded acreage like mine clear-cut and ruined for any recreational use. Having gone to school in fishery science, I also knew the dangers to small aquatic ecosystems by such actions. In the book of Genesis, we learn that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. Now, in the original Hebrew, man's purpose was to abad and shamar. Abad is actually the root of the word service, and shamar, protect. So, an alternative translation would be that man was placed in the garden to serve and protect it. Today, this would translate best into being a good steward. So, I feel very strongly about being a good steward of the land. With all this in mind, I consulted with a forester who surveyed the property with me and helped me come up with a sound management plan, with the primary purpose being to create a healthy, thriving forest that could be sustainably harvested over the course of years. He identified trees that should be harvested immediately because they were either invasive and damaging to the ecosystem or were simply not productive. On the surface, this is what the book of Luke, chapter 13, seems to refer to. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, For 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Well, this is good advice for any farmer. Remove what is unproductive and allow room and resources to be used for what is or will be productive. So with a well thought out plan that focused on a selective harvest of timber of certain species and certain sizes, I was ready to put it into action. Sort of. I sat on it for a while. Even this great plan would change the landscape I was accustomed to. I knew that. And change is never comfortable. For 2 years I did nothing. I tried from time to time. I contacted several loggers, but had difficulties hammering out the details. Part of me figured if it was going to be so difficult, then maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. Which is ridiculous, of course. When is the right thing ever easy? Finally, things got moving. I found a logger and we came to an agreement and he began to cut. Throughout the process, I kept trying to imagine what it would look like when it was all finished. What landmarks would still be there? How thin would the forest look? I knew it would be different, but I didn't know how different. I wasn't prepared for the result. The harvest was over by early June, but I didn't have an opportunity to check it out until late July. When I did, I was dumbfounded. I actually got lost trying to find the road I've used for years. I didn't know where to turn because apparently I'd been using certain trees to navigate by, and they were no longer there. To say the least, the change was more drastic than I anticipated. I started to get upset. After all, I was only at the edge of my 90 acres and wasn't sure if I could stomach what else I would find. I did get my bearings and made my way into the heart of the woods, still in shock at how different everything looked. The place wasn't clear-cut, but there was a significant absence of trees, at least as it first appeared. Eventually, I got out of the truck to take a closer look. As I wandered around, I noticed smaller details. The shoots from freshly cut stumps were clipped off neatly, a sign that deer were enjoying the new browse. Animal tracks were everywhere. Young oak and poplar seedlings were in full foliage as they took advantage of the sunlight reaching them in the new clearings. New life was everywhere. There were still plenty of trees. The old oaks still stood tall and majestic, ready to drop a crop of acorns, and medium-sized poplars now had room to grow into giant poplars. As I drove home trying to process all that I had seen, I realized I had actually accomplished what I wanted. I had changed an aging, unhealthy forest into a young, healthy one that would grow and thrive for years to come. No, it didn't look like the same as it always had. My children will see and get to know a forest that looks different from the one I grew up with. But I hope and pray that because of my stewardship, they will get to enjoy it every bit as much as I have. That was a pretty nice revelation. But God wasn't done with me yet. He still had another lesson for me. At the United Methodist Annual Conference, I heard the church referred to as a sinking ship. Every year, membership is declining and churches close their doors. But the more I thought and reflected on the day's events, a more appropriate metaphor took shape. I began to see the church as a forest, and we are its stewards. We're tasked with abad and shamar, serving and protecting the church that Christ began. As stewards, we must maintain a healthy, thriving congregation filled with the Holy Spirit. But we haven't been doing our job. The numbers don't lie. Like my piece of property, we are an aging forest. Our church is full of history and joyful memories, old glories and past triumphs. Some of you probably remember when your pews were completely full every Sunday, when attendance numbered in the hundreds instead of, the dozens. At its height, our church built beautiful cathedrals to glorify God and accommodate the throngs of people that flocked to them. But now, they stand as mostly empty monuments to what once was, with congregations barely able to afford the monthly upkeep. That's the dark side. the doom and gloom. But here's the good part. We can change that. How? By being good stewards. By cutting down the unfruitful to make way for the more productive. Now, this is the point where I need to make myself completely clear. I am not comparing unproductive trees in a forest to individuals in a congregation. Every single person that walks through the door is a vital, integral part of the church. Each one is a steward, not a tree to be judged and harvested. What I'm talking about are ideas, traditions, programs, and activities. These are the things we must evaluate. Just as the giant pines and poplars on my property were preventing new trees from sprouting and coming into their own, so too can old ideas and traditions strangle fledgling ministries. If we are to truly revitalize the church, every practice, every program, every attempt at ministry must be scrutinized and evaluated to see if it is truly fruitful. This isn't an easy task. Many practices continue simply because they've become routine and we do them without even thinking about them. I remember one time after my grandparents had passed away, my dad and I were staying at the old house, and as we got ready to leave, he turned on an old lamp that I had turned off earlier that day. I asked him why he always left it on when we left. After all, we had installed timers and motion-sensing floodlights to discourage would-be thieves. His response was, "I don't know. Mom always left it on." Well, because we've always done it that way, that's not a good reason for doing a thing. If, however, that particular practice is found to be productive, then it should absolutely be continued, with purpose. Another potential problem with this type of selective harvest is the possibility of offending and alienating the person who started the program or tradition. However, we can't let personal pride and egocentrism become an obstruction to doing God's will. As a former pastor once reminded me, it's about God, stupid. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about God. We must remember this, especially when the productivity of our own pet projects are questioned. The big question then is, on what criteria do we evaluate all these things? Well, businesses judge their practices on profitability. Are they making money? If so, they'll be continued. If not, they're modified or discontinued. The profitability or productivity of a church, though, is somewhat different. It's not measured in dollars and cents. Our goal is more ethereal, but no less real. We must judge our programs and practices on how they help people spiritually. Do they bring us closer to a relationship with God? Do they deepen our faith? Are they truly in line with the teachings of Christ? I had the luxury of consulting a forester when developing a management plan. But in the church, we don't have it quite so easy. We can't pick up the phone and call Jesus and ask him what we should do. But we can pray for wisdom and insight. Meaningful, deliberate prayer can, does, and will help us through the process. So what does this all mean? Well, if and when we do embark on this journey, what will it look like? Honestly, I can't answer that question. Just like I didn't know what my property would look like. But what I do know is that we will see a change in the landscape of the church. Now, as I said before, change is never comfortable, especially when we don't know what it will look like. We may see things that initially make us cringe because they're not familiar. But if we can get past that knee-jerk reaction and look closely, we will see that those things are actually a sign of new life, a healthy, thriving church. Our children and grandchildren will see and get to know a church that looks different from the one we grew up in, but with our good stewardship, they will reap its benefits just as we did. And that, after all, is the whole point. Thanks for listening to my story. If you like what I have to say, I have some more that I'd love to share with you. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And now, sit back, relax, and watch me finish this painting.